Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about one of the most dramatic turning points in the ongoing war in Ukraine, a moment that has been described as one of President Putin's biggest defeats on the battlefield. The liberation of Dobropillia and the sudden collapse of more than 100,000 Russian troops within just hours has shocked both analysts and observers worldwide. In this review we will break down what actually happened, exploring the situation in terms of its exterior battlefield environment, the interior factors and logistics, the performance of both sides during the clash, the safety features and defensive mechanisms that were in play, the unique selling points of Ukraine's approach that made this possible, the cost of such operations, and finally we will conclude with what this means for the wider war. From the exterior perspective, Dobropillia was a highly strategic location. Situated in the Donetsk region, it acted as a significant rail and road hub that allowed Russian forces to move supplies, fuel, and reinforcements deeper into the front lines. For months, Russia attempted to fortify it with heavy artillery placements, armored divisions, and defensive trenches. The city itself became a fortress-like outpost surrounded by layered defenses, including minefields, bunkers, and anti-tank obstacles. From a visual standpoint, Russian forces tried to project an image of strength, with convoys of armored vehicles positioned on the outskirts and communication towers linking command centers across the occupied zone. Yet, this seemingly powerful exterior masked deep internal weaknesses that would eventually be exposed by Ukraine's lightning operation. Looking at the interior side, the real story becomes even clearer. Inside the Russian lines, morale had already been eroding for weeks. Soldiers were overextended, exhausted, and lacked adequate supplies. Food shortages, poor medical facilities, and broken supply chains left many units vulnerable. Internal communications were plagued with disorganization and even deliberate misinformation as commanders feared reporting the truth to higher officials. In contrast, Ukraine's interior strategy was meticulously calculated. Special forces and local resistance groups worked together to gather intelligence, sabotage key infrastructure, and cut Russian lines of retreat. This created an atmosphere where Russian troops felt surrounded even before the main counteroffensive began. In short, the interior situation highlighted Russia's fragility and Ukraine's growing operational confidence. When we shift focus to performance, Ukraine's military demonstrated extraordinary efficiency and coordination. In the span of hours, highly mobile mechanized brigades advanced through Russian defenses with precision. Western-supplied weapons such as HIMARS rocket systems, artillery guided by drones, and armored vehicles provided by allies played a decisive role in breaking Russian positions. The speed of the advance caught Russian troops completely off guard. Units abandoned their posts, left behind tanks, artillery, and vast amounts of ammunition. The collapse was so rapid that many soldiers reportedly fled on foot, leaving entire battalions without leadership or communication. On the Russian side, performance fell to its lowest point since the war began. Commanders failed to anticipate Ukraine's maneuver warfare, defensive lines crumbled under sustained precision strikes, and the lack of coordination led to mass surrenders. The contrast in performance was clear. Ukraine operated with discipline and momentum, while Russia relied on outdated methods and overstretched manpower. Safety features are often overlooked in warfare, but in this case, they played an important role. Ukraine made extensive use of defensive safety measures that minimized casualties during the operation. Civilians were evacuated from the immediate conflict zones ahead of time, reducing the risk of collateral damage. Precision strikes ensured that only military targets were hit, a stark difference from Russia's often indiscriminate shelling. Ukrainian forces also used advanced battlefield medicine, drones for surveillance to avoid ambushes, and secure communication systems to prevent intercepted orders. Russia, however, relied on outdated Soviet-era safety doctrines that left their troops exposed. Trenches without proper reinforcement, lack of medical evacuation systems, and poor protection against drone reconnaissance meant Russian troops were vulnerable at every stage of the counteroffensive. Safety, in this context, became another advantage that Ukraine successfully leveraged. The unique selling points of this liberation campaign are what truly set it apart in the narrative of the war. The first is speed. Ukraine achieved in hours what many thought would take weeks. The second is psychological warfare. By cutting off communication and supply lines, Ukraine sowed panic among Russian troops before engaging in direct combat. Another unique point was the coordinated use of Western military aid with Ukrainian tactical ingenuity. Advanced weapons were combined with local knowledge, guerrilla tactics, and the bravery of ordinary soldiers and civilians who resisted occupation. Finally, this liberation was symbolic. Dobropillia was not only a logistical hub but also a morale booster. Its liberation sent a strong message to both Ukrainians and Russians that the momentum had shifted. For Ukrainians, it was proof that victory was achievable. For Russians, it was a devastating blow to their sense of invincibility. Now, when we talk about the price of such an operation, we need to look at it from multiple angles. Militarily, Ukraine paid the price of deploying some of its most elite units and expending large amounts of ammunition and fuel. There were casualties among soldiers, though far fewer than anticipated thanks to the speed of the offensive. Financially, Western support played a significant role, with billions of dollars in equipment and training contributing to the success. On the Russian side, however, the price was catastrophic. The loss of over 100,000 troops, whether through death, surrender, or desertion, is staggering. Entire brigades disintegrated, thousands of pieces of equipment were captured or destroyed, and the psychological cost on the Russian army was immeasurable. For Moscow, the financial and political price was equally high, with increased sanctions, domestic unrest, and further isolation on the global stage. In conclusion, the liberation of Dobropillia represents more than just a battlefield victory. It marks a fundamental shift in the trajectory of the war. From the exterior defenses that collapsed under pressure, to the interior weaknesses of Russia's military structure, to the outstanding performance of Ukrainian forces, every element of this story demonstrates the widening gap between the two armies. Safety features, both for soldiers and civilians, highlighted Ukraine's modern approach to warfare. Unique selling points such as speed, precision, and psychological dominance set this operation apart from earlier battles. The price paid was heavy but ultimately decisive, with Russia bearing the greatest losses. For Ukraine, Dobropillia is not just a city reclaimed, it is a symbol of resilience, strategy, and the possibility of eventual victory. For Russia, it is a reminder that even massive numbers cannot secure success without morale, leadership, and adaptability. This battle will be remembered as one of the most humiliating defeats for Putin, and perhaps the moment that signaled the unraveling of his war ambitions.